So today we're going to explore the story of Cyrus Teed and this amazing group of women that helped him form this church. We're at the Koreshan State Park in Estero, Florida. Let's check this one out. So as I mentioned, our story begins with Cyrus Teed. He was born in the 1800s in New York, and in the 1860s he had this divine vision, as he said. He was a doctor up in upstate New York. This divine revelation that he had was all about what he saw as this new unity church. And he believed that the earth was hollow, and rather than us living on the exterior surface of it, we lived on the inside, the internal surface of the earth. Really unique. That was his vision. And in the end, that was ultimately the foundation of this Koreshan Unity church, if you will, or Koreshan Unity community. He truly believed in equality. He had a strong female following, and not for the reasons that you might think when you hear about a cult, where you think of strong female following means there were shenanigans going on. Part of this Koreshan Unity church was a belief in celibacy. So there was not some of the same things you might have assumed were going on that I did as well. In the end, there was a group of women that helped essentially run the day-to-day activities of the church. They were the leaders of the Koreshan Unity Foundation. Now, I mentioned Koreshan, potentially pronounced Koreshan. Yeah, that's very similar to the name David Koresh, who, by the way, had very similar beliefs in some of the things that he was teaching. It probably is not a surprise, right? Like, that is interesting that I think people look at examples they can use or find that begin to manipulate people or build their own self-esteem, or whatever thing happens to people with a Messiah-like complex. Now, here's the part I find really interesting. So think about that. In the 1860s or so, he has this divine intervention, this divine belief. He sees this unique hollow earth, that we live on the inside of it, that women have equal rights. And that's part of the reason why so many women came to this community, in a lot of cases leaving their husbands behind with their families to come here, believed in equal rights for women. And then you look at a very close relative of his, who was Joseph Smith. And for those that don't know, Joseph Smith is sort of the founder of the Mormon church, the Mormon belief system. And, you know, listen, I'm not a scholar on any of these things, but then you see a very different perspective. And in those early days, in the 1800s, in the Mormon church, there was a belief around polygamy, right? So that was a little bit common. And you see these two very polar opposite views of women and leadership and how the family dynamic may work. I just think it's completely intriguing, and it's very odd to me that they came from essentially the same family. And what's really interesting is right behind me, they used to have an old printing press. Highway 41 is just next to me. And that printing press not only printed everything that the community needed, it also did the same thing for local businesses. And it was part of the money that was earned from this particular group. I'm going to try to avoid using the word cult through the whole thing, but through this group. This is sort of a restored sitting room inside of the founder's house. Really kind of interesting. Some checkers and a place to read over there, and the tea set. And then down below here, you even have the Cyrus Teed Shepherd, Stone of Israel. This is Dr. Cyrus Teed in 1906 taking a picture with a giant tarpon that he caught. So tarpon fishing is not new in Florida. This was the old dining hall. It's a photo of it here. It was built in 1898 and lasted until 1949. It was essentially a three-story building. The two upper floors were used as dormitories for some of the sisters. So this is kind of a neat picture. You can see Dr. Cyrus Teed in the upper right-hand corner, along with Victoria Gradia, or Annie Ordway. And then this was some of the children that were part of the Koreshan Unity Church. And this was after some kind of a special event they did. This is all pretty well restored and maintained. It's fairly amazing, actually. So just imagine this, it's in the early 1900s and you arrive by boat, a sailing boat, the boat Ada that they had here. And you actually make your way up this little mangrove-filled river into this landing where there's a lot of bamboo. And I don't know if you can see this behind me, but right back here over my shoulder, all kinds of bamboo. They called this bamboo landing. So the boat ties up right here and the new members would get off of the boat. Now, by the way, these were volunteers. They came on their own. So you arrive, you get off of this dock, and as you turn this corner, you may very well see a band playing here. And you would kind of come up these steps, you would be welcomed from the community. Obviously, this was a loving place and people respected one another and they were glad to be here. You might arrive with your children or your family and you come right up these steps to what they used to call Bamboo Landing because of all the bamboo. And you have the founder's house and all of the community would be right on these grounds here. And the grounds here were absolutely beautiful. I'm walking over one of two old Victorian bridges, these beautiful bridges that were built, you know, back in 1905 and 1906. They were since lost to hurricanes and have been rebuilt, but it's amazing to sort of see this. And this was a little bit of their walk through the gardens. They referred to some of these trees as the monkey trees. I think they were old mangrove trees where they had the stems that came down into the ground. Just really neat history. Beautiful bridges and walkways just to have serenity and peace and be in the gardens out here, right along the river. So I'm just over the bridge back on the main grounds, and this is an area where they have these little like rounded curved trails. I don't really understand the purpose of them. They probably had some walking serenity purpose, but they're beautiful nonetheless. Here's the gravestone of Hedwig Michel. She was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1892 and is the one that ultimately ended up donating this to the state of Florida. This is the Koreshan bakery, and what's interesting is this is all glassed off obviously to protect the items, but pretty cool to see how they went ahead making money for this particular community. And all of these buildings seem to have a second story where there were residences above them. Chances are they worked there, they lived there, and they were part of this overall community. They thrived together, which is kind of an interesting concept for sure. And this building here is the Lillian Vesta Newcomb Cottage. So Lillian Vesta Newcomb's mother was part of this particular Unity Church. I think it was in Chicago, I might have that wrong. And what's interesting is she's lived her whole life here. She actually died in 1974, and she served this community and was part of the active Koreshan church and community her whole life. And you get a sense for what this small community home might have been like for one of the members. Bathroom over on that side, and you know, this went to the hallway to the little sort of living area on the other side. And this here is the cottage of Conrad Schendler. He lived here with his sister up until 1964. This is an old steam engine built in Georgia that would have been used to do a lot of the farming and the work in the early days here of the Koreshan Unity community. Those big old balanced wheels on the back. Small machine shop right here. I used to do all the work for the community. Pretty wild. This is the coolest thing when you start to see how some of this stuff worked, right? Steam engines ran all these pulleys up on the ceiling, and then those pulleys all connected to other items and then came right down. Here's one running a bandsaw, or here's one for a table saw. That is wild. Just think to see the belt work up here. You can see all the main shaft, transfers, the gearing that happens because of the sizes, right down to a drill press. Look at that. grinder if you just need to grind knives, blades. Really impressive. This may be some of the coolest stuff I've seen in here so far, just to see the ingenuity and figuring out how to do gearing all off of one primary shaft that was doing most of that particular driving in there. Probably all off of that steam engine until they ended up with diesels at some point later in the history of this place. You know, this would have been some kind of hot for sure. But making the things you need right in here. Even had an old metal shop and forge right here. That was a forge from Cleveland. And you can see where they were just doing all kinds of iron work in here. Now this behind me is really cool. This is an old Fairbanks steam-driven engine. And I'll show you what they did with this thing, because this was driving electricity in this place, including compressed air. Really cool. The size of those two giant pistons up top. And you can see here, that right there is an air compressor filling up the canisters of air for other tooling they might have needed. Now this giant steam engine, you can see these belts here that go to the left. They go all the way to a set of gears for reduction or increase, and they go right over here to an enormous generator. And you can see that this is part of what was generating power for the community over here. There's the cutoff on the far side and their test bed right here. I'm not exactly sure what this is, but this is probably a smaller generator for some other portion, and it just takes some of the excess drive off of this thing to power that one. And this whole thing's been a lot cooler than I thought it might be. It's been fun wandering around. I'm gonna go check out a couple more buildings before we call it quits here today. So this dinner bell right here is how they called the community to come on in when it was dinner time or meal time. Pretty neat. So this building is called the Planetary Court, and the Planetary Court was home to 7 women that made up the Planetary Council. They were the governing body of the Koreshan Unity. And here, from the deck of the Planetary Court, where these 7 women lived, they could see most of the community as it was its current size. Straight ahead there is the boat launch and ramp along the river. You might be able to see in the distance the fancy garden bridge that went down there. And then the industrial side of the complex is just around the corner of those trees there. This is one of the meeting rooms in the Planetary Court Council building. This is one of the other sleeping rooms in the Planetary Court. And what's interesting is you can see a little bedpan right there. Area to change, and then a wash basin right on the counter. This has been truly amazing, and if you are anywhere in Southwest Florida, this is worth a little half-day trip. I learned so much, and I am always intrigued by these unique segments of society that have their own unique beliefs, and they're so different than yours or mine. It's just really cool to see it, read about the history, and this place is stocked with volunteers that are so willing to share with you the history, the details, and all the other information that you might find really interesting if you visit a place like this. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. We'll see you again soon when we're out exploring some adventures.